give a warm welcome to Andrew Grant, who's come all the way from a Sydney summer of Manly Beach.
Thank you. It's hard to imagine that yesterday I was in 35 degrees heat, swimming at Manly Beach, and then today I go for a walk and there's ice all over the lagoon or your harbour. But it made me think about last week I was teaching someone to swim. Now I grew up at the beach. I just thought everyone could swim. And I was teaching someone to swim and I said, look, we're going to come in here, we're going to come over and maybe look at your hand style and get the technique working right. And I got him in the water and I said, right, let's have a look at your technique. And he starts swimming. He couldn't even put his head in the water. Now, I find that rather amusing. You may not, because I don't know how much you swim. But growing up at the beach, I could swim before I could walk. And he was a guy that I thought I could teach to swim, but I couldn't even get his head under the water. So we threw the whole lesson out the window in terms of using your hands and kicking with your feet, and we blew bubbles for half an hour, 25-year-old. Just put your face in the water, just blow bubbles. And, all this talk about digital, and last year it was about innovation, and a couple of years ago we were talking about creative thinking. The words keep changing. But I just want to back up a little bit and realize that until I could get this person comfortable to put his head in the water, I had no chance of teaching him to swim. So before we race and throw the creativity side out and jump into, yes, let's find all the great tools that you've heard today, let's just think about from a personal perspective, until we are comfortable with creative thinking, embracing all the tools around it, including the new digital ones and what you're going to hear from the next session, will not be as effective. Now, that's a personal perspective. From a company perspective, we have worked with, as was mentioned, some very large companies. And one company we worked with, a bank in Singapore, I won't say who it was, they asked us to come and do a design thinking session for them, and I thought we were just going to teach them 2 days. Then we were told that they're going to have to pitch that back to the CEO and a CEO team. The problem is the CEO team was never briefed on what design thinking was. The participants were never chosen. We didn't know who they were. As a matter of fact, I found out from someone later on that if the participants volunteered to go, their boss would say, well, obviously you're not working hard enough if you can take a couple of days off to do this. So the whole culture was designed to fail. They would never get their ideas to the innovation lab because the whole culture, they wanted to become like DBS Bank, which is one of the global digital banks based out of Singapore. And they thought they could just do it by taking shortcuts and learning the creative thinking tools. So to everything I talk about today, I want you to think of it from your own personal perspective. And I also want you to think about it from a company perspective. So let's have a look then and back up a little bit about what does block and what does kill creativity. 2% of us maintain the creativity we had as children into our adulthood. Now, just to really rub this in, you've probably seen this famous TED Talk and the Marshmallow Challenge. And the idea is everyone's given, tables are given spaghetti sticks, an elastic band and a marshmallow. And each table has to design the highest possible marshmallow tower they can. Now, if you think creativity and banking, which are a lot of my clients, don't go together, every time I go to banking, they're asked to do more with less. Most of you in your industries are asked to do more with less. You're given finite resources and you're asked to do more than your competitors with those finite resources. And then you say, I can't be bothered doing creativity because it's just about finger painting and staring at the clouds. But look at this marshmallow challenge. The average group built a tower of 54 centimetres. The next group to come in were the business students. Has anyone done an MBA here or graduate? Well, look at what your $30,000 bought you. The inability to do more with less for that $30,000. The next group are the engineers. How do you think the engineers went? You'd assume they went well. I mean, that's what they spend their time doing. I don't know if it was creativity. Lawyers. Any lawyers in the room? Yeah, too embarrassed, I understand that. But let's have a look at how the lawyers went. The lawyers did a little bit less than the average group. Now, I know we have one CEO in the room. Have we got any other CEOs in the room? Okay, are they worth their pay packet? Don't answer that. Let's have a look at the answers up here. How did the CEOs go? Well, they didn't do too bad. I mean, for that little bit of extra money they get, they're better than the rest of us. But let's look at the last group of kids. How well did the children go? Better than every other group except the engineers. More with less. Look at the difference between the first three. It's almost 100% different with finite resources. That is what creativity is about. And in this short session, I'm not going to have time to answer it, but I want to pose the question to you, how did the kids do so well? What we've done in our research is to show that when certain environments are present, creative thinking is killed. And that environment can be your own mind, or it can be your organizational culture, or it can be your company environment. What are the most important things that you need in your workplace? We've heard a lot of either exciting or depressing stories about what's going to happen with AI and what's going to happen to our jobs. The only job that can't be automated will be the ability to take something so far over from this side of the field and so far over this side of the field to put together to come up with creative thinking, a creative idea. Let's think of the fact that we have a crime scene. We were creative as children, we're not as adults. We're losing our creativity since the mid-1990s. And to help companies work through this in a safe environment, we designed a Cluedo-type game board, because no one's going to go and say your boss is a control freak, but maybe a little card sort of slipped onto the table. And we want to ask the questions, what killed creativity? So we're looking at, was it stress that killed creativity with a weapon of crushing coercion in the boss's office? Is that what happened? You have these creative ideas and you go into the boss's office really, really excited, and it's not that the boss says no, it's the way the boss says no that kills your creativity. Why bother? Why try again? Somewhere along these lines, these fictional characters, these fictional voices get inside our head and they kill our creativity. For 20 years, we were teaching design thinking to companies, and we realized there was no point in teaching design thinking if everyone's going to turn up with an excuse. That's not my department. Let's shove it off to another group. So we worked with a neuroscientist and a psychologist from New South Wales Uni to come up and validate the things that we'd learned in the workplace to see what sort of neuroscience is going on behind the creativity. And if you look at the research, one of the biggest surveys undertaken globally to 350,000 people said that 79% of your organization are disengaged. That means the enthusiasm they had on their first day at work, and think about yourself, is no longer there. Only 21% of the workplace are fully engaged. 79% have been attacked by these suspects, these killers, that are blocking our ability to come up with creative ideas. We're not shoving it off to one department. We're saying that everyone should be involved in that. So we've come up with, as I mentioned, 7 killers or suspects or blockers, if you don't like the metaphor, to try and help people understand what are the things that are blocking our creativity. If I could be so crude as to talk about the red part of the brain and a blue part of the brain, there is a study that shows that in the red side of the brain, which is the primitive brainstem, if you hold your finger like that and put your thumb underneath it, that's the primitive part under there. It's reactionary. It responds to fear. It responds to threats of loss. It feels judgment. And the result when we are functioning in what I'm calling the red brain, to keep it simple, is it becomes anxious, survival, moody, disengaged. The problem is, how can we ask people to be creative? How can we ask them to do design thinking? How can we say, let's all go and embrace digital, which is basically saying, let's embrace what we don't know, if our offices, if our minds are constantly living in the red part of the brain, fighting, flighting, and fleeting. So we have designed not only these 7 killers, but we've put together a model, and I know you just love models because this is probably the 10th model of the day. We've put together a model that shows that not only are these killers individual killers, but we worked with a company once that had a wonderful CEO, and he left and got replaced by another one. And within about 4 weeks, we saw this terrible cycle happen within the company. Before he left, before the good CEO left, they were winning the Great Place to Work awards globally for their division. within this large company. And when the new guy came back, everything went downhill. And it started with control. And that control then led to fear. And that fear then led to pressure. That pressure led to narrow-mindedness. The narrow-mindedness led to apathy. Who cares? The apathy led to insulation. And finally, it led on to pessimism. Just give up. Can't be bothered. Being kicked down, I'm not getting up again. Why should I work for this boss? And within about 4 months, we saw what was a fantastic, very large multinational company in a country in the world completely go down the tube because of the leadership style. The leader had brought in all these creative killers. Now, the good news is there is a life cycle as well. And I'm not going to go into the details of the life cycle at the moment because today's talk is who killed creativity. You'll have to get me back to find out how to get it back. But there is a life cycle. I don't want you all getting too depressed at the end of this session. And the life cycle we could also talk about uses the blue part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And what the researchers discovered were 3 key things. When people felt they were in a safe and secure environment, when people felt they felt listened to and respected, and when the leaders knew their job well and communicated, it moved people into the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain where the creativity happens. And as a result, people were confident, they wanted to go the extra mile, and they were engaged. Now, what percentage of the workforce did I say were engaged? 21%. That means 79% of our workforce are living in a base part of the brain, the primitive part of the brain, responding to fear, control, pressure. And then we ask them to be creative. We ask them to embrace digital. It's not going to work. We try and get them to create a cultural environment that kicks the killers out and creates an action plan where they can say, well, if we seriously want to be creative, which leads to innovation, which leads to digital, then we need to start creating a safe place where people can feel they're creative. And what does that look like? One company we worked with, we went to their innovation lab. The guy took us up. They'd spent millions of dollars on the top floor of a very fancy building. And the innovation leader took us around and showed us everything. And we had to give the obligatory, wow, that's fantastic. And then he pulled us aside and said, Andrew, it's not working. I said, why? He said, because the CEO's already taken the corner office. It's meant to all be hot desks. There's no collaboration. There's no trust. Everyone's just gone back to what they were doing. I said, that's great. You've spent millions of dollars on the hardware. What have you done for the software? What have you done for these people to create an environment where they can feel creative? He looked at me as if a naughty boy that had got busted for doing so. He said, nothing. I said, so all that money spent on the innovation lab, but you've done nothing to actually train up the team. You just expect them to come up with ideas by putting them in the innovation lab. It didn't work. In today's digital age, we've been told that we need to embrace digitalness because it's our insurance against disruption. And I want to go back to that bank that I mentioned to you that was simply hoped that they could become like DBS Bank, which is a global leader in digital banking out of Singapore. And I wanted to reflect on what went wrong with this process. They wanted to do the design thinking. The CEO said, come and do it. And these are the sorts of questions that they did not ask. They weren't prepared to think about awareness, diagnostic frameworks. To go one step further, they had no alignment. They hadn't thought about who people were going to it. There was no idea development, and there was no education on the process. It was just go and do your design thinking, present back to the boss, and then we'll take it to an innovation lab. Trying to take shortcuts, but it didn't work. And then the final one was there was no selection process. There was nothing to do with management. There was no pre-work. The brief they gave us, the budget they gave us, was not going to meet the outcomes. And until we could have talked to the real stakeholders, we weren't going to go and do it. And we never got access to the real stakeholders, so it didn't happen. Now, what you see here is your typical design thinking process. Some of you that have done it, or if you've done your one-day course or your 6-month course with Stanford or IDEO, will see that these are the typical things that happen in a design thinking process to come up with great ideas. But what we believe is missing is this original part, and that is building an awareness and an understanding of what are the things that block people's creativity. You can't just tell them to go and be creative. It doesn't work. We've got to set the environment up to be creative for it to work properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. It's very good. No idea how you did that trick. It's completely beyond me, but my kids would suss you out straight away.
They would, straight away. Don't show it to kids.
So a couple of things that stood out to me. First of all, when you said that, psychopathic disorders among CEOs in London, I interview at least one a day.
Well, there you go.
That's a real worry, isn't it? That's a real worry. And secondly, as well, when you talked about 15 years ago, you were talking to Singapore bankers about creativity. And I was thinking, wasn't it that creative accounting that caused the global financial crisis?
Well, there's the danger. The bankers, when they came,
10
their
years
only
ago,
concept of creativity
was... So was it you that's...
No. That's right. The only concept of creativity was the creative accounting.
We can't have bankers being too creative, that's right. You never know where we might end up. Global recession.
True,
but anyway.
True.
Okay, so, you've talked a lot about this. And I have to say, when you were talking at the end there about, when everything is stopping... Netflix pausing, things aren't working. I felt so guilty because I thought about my youngest son and how much time he's spending on all this stuff and how, that lack of creative time is just so essential, isn't it? But at the same time, they talk about the water cooler moments, don't they, in the office when you're talking.
This is where the creative ideas happen, and if we don't create them, look, I forgot to say, but some of you might say, well, we don't have the budget of Google, so that's not a fair comparison to make. We can't make a Google canteen. But, if I go to your office, how many of you have got stained coffee cups piling up in the sink and mission statements peeling off the wall and not a hang space, not a place where people feel comfortable to go? Comfortable to talk and connect and come up with ideas. So you don't necessarily need the budget of Google. Just create places where people can share ideas.
Quite interesting, actually, because you may remember when Marissa Mayer became the chief executive of Yahoo, and she just had her first child. She became CEO. She was pregnant. She was about 36 years old. And one of the first things she did was ban working at home. And now, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but her reasoning for that was it stifled creativity because people weren't working near each other
so they didn't have
and talking at the water coolers and all that kind of stuff. That was her argument anyway. But anyway, there we are. Andrew, it's great to see you. You're going to be signing your books later, aren't you?
Yes.
Is that right?
And we're going to switch across to a more deeper talk on sustainable innovation at 4:00. So we'll switch from the creativity hat through to the sustainable innovation hat.
Okay. Very envious of your growing up right next to a beach.
Thank you.
I'm one of those people who doesn't like my head underwater. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.